All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Keenan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martin Sather. And Martin, another special guest today.
We do, Jake, yes, and it's Neil Hampshire, the chief executive now of the Hunslet Rugby League Club. He's doing a great job at Hunslet. They've got promoted this last season, and they're going to be in the championship next year. So a great achievement, Neil, and congratulations to everybody at the club for that. And we'd like to talk to you about your life in rugby league and what your views on the game are and what your views about Hunslet and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a pretty open discussion, I think.
Yeah, that's fine, and thanks for having me on. It's a privilege to be here and talking with you guys. I've seen these podcasts before. I know they go out to a lot of people, so it'll be good to get our views out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. Well, let's take it back from the very start, mate. How did you first become involved in rugby league?
Well, it was the family, realistically. So my uncle Kevin played for Hunslet, and he actually played in the 1959 championship final.
Really?
Bradford.
Was Hampshire his surname as well?
No, Doyle. Kevin Doyle.
Right.
So my mum was his sister. So he was two brothers, 6 sisters, big family. And he played for Hunslet through to about 62, 63. And then he went to Doncaster, where he ended up as captain.
He missed the trip to Wembley then in 1965?
He did miss the trip to Wembley, yeah. As did I. So I was born in 1960, and I started on the terraces. I was taken there in a pram at times, and then we were there from probably about 6, 7 year old.
Can you remember much about the old Parkside ground?
Only that it was pretty run down and pretty dilapidated, and it was great for kids because it was like a building society where you could just run around with a ball and have fun whilst the adults were watching the game, to be honest with you.
And did you play any rugby league growing up, or did you?
No, not really. I was never tough enough. When we started playing at school, as soon as you got here, I thought, well, I think I'd rather play football. I can avoid people.
Yeah. Were you actually brought up in Hunslet, in the Hunslet area of Leeds, or?
Yeah, I was born in Armley. And then we moved to Purton Street down Holbeck, which was part of Hunslet down there for a while.
Born
and then
in
moved
Armley,
to
that's Barbara Taylor Bradford, just died. She was born there as well.
It was Armley Hospital, wasn't it? So,
as was Alan Bennett, of course, the famous playwright. So you've got a few, people in your, neck of the woods, really, I suppose.
Well, I think they might be on the blue plaques out there, but I don't think I will be.
Yeah, that's great. What are some of your other early memories? Is there any highlights over your time supporting and being a part of that area that stick out for you?
Yeah, definitely in '73, being there for the last game at the old Parkside when we played York, and seeing Jeff Gunny sat down in the middle of the pitch at the end of the game. I mean, that was quite sad. You don't realise how poignant that was until you sort of grow up and see it, reflect back on your memories. And then, of course, moving to the Greyhound Stadium when we all thought the club was going to fold, and Jeff Gunny did a fantastic job in keeping the club going. And that was just a strange sensation going there, and we had the tuning fork pokes.
What did you think of it? Because I remember going there as well, Neil, and I actually quite liked that little stadium in a strange way. Maybe I'm looking at it through rose-coloured spectacles, who knows, but I always quite enjoyed games there.
I thought it was a great stadium, and it was great for the fans because obviously with the Greyhound racing there's a complete glass frontage bar on there, so everybody was happy having their drinks and watching the game while we were stood on the terraces. But the one problem you did have at that stadium was there was just no grass. It was just a complete mud pitch. It was a really, really poor pitch. But I do think the council missed a trick when Hunslet did actually want to stay there and build that into a proper stadium.
Yes, I think they did.
And they sold it on.
Yeah, and of course they played at Elland Road for quite a long time, didn't they?
We did play at Elland Road and eventually got moved off Elland Road, largely because of the UEFA Championship games in '96, was it? So we had to, at the time, Leeds United were going to host a couple of those games, but you couldn't host games if it was a dual-use stadium.
No.
So they moved us off and built South Leeds Stadium for us then.
And how did you enjoy watching Hunslet play at Elland Road? I mean, that's quite an incredible experience, I thought. Again, I saw quite a few games there.
Well, the one that sticks in the memory is, of course, the Hull KR Cup game when we beat the Hull KR and Graham King did that, pull off that fantastic tackle in the corner towards the end of the game. But yes, it was good. It was a good environment, even though you're only using one side of the stand. It was a great experience. We averaged about 1,000 to 2,000 there, and of course we had a lot of the Aussies then. in those days. You know, Graham Jennings.
And the
Mark
fans
Graham.
made quite a bit of noise, even though there were not that many of them. I seem to recall, anyway.
They still do. They still do. They're still probably
that's
the loudest and proudest out there, I have to say.
It's interesting you say that, because the game at Swinton that sealed promotion to the Championship, I saw that on the Sportsman website, and you certainly were a bunch of noisy buggers, basically, weren't you? The Hunslet fans, they actually dominated the crowd noise coming out of the TV, and you could almost sort of sense that support got Hunslet home.
Yeah, I think it did, especially towards the last 3 or 4 games when the players had gone through a long season and we were pushing. We were on a big, difficult sort of track, if you like, going away to Rochdale again.
And you lost the first game, didn't
we
you?
did lose.
Yeah.
But I was at that game, and the fans were just as loud at that game. I can tell you that much.
They were. And what got me about that game was, in one of the papers it reported that we got thumped at Rochdale afternoon, 30 points to 18. Anybody that was there will tell you that was a 6-point ball game. It was much, much closer than we thought. So when we went again, I was fairly confident that we'd have a chance to win.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, the conditions that day weren't that great. There was a bit of rain around, and there was some fireworks that sort of took off at the end of the match there, a bit of a push and shove. But I really enjoyed it. And as I said, the fans from Hunslet there was only maybe, 20, 30 of them, but you thought it was the whole stand was full with how loud they were.
I think there's a few more than that, but we do make a noise wherever we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, mate, you also, I guess you had a bit of a career before you came into working with Hunslet. I guess you worked with HMRC. That's
the old Inland Revenue and then HMRC. I did that for 43 years, man and boy.
Yeah,
started as a filing clerk, ended up an assistant director. So it was fairly interesting going through the different phases and working across the tax and both the customs spectrums.
Were you dealing mainly with company taxation or personal taxation or VAT or
both? VAT was one thing I rarely touched, but and on the customs side, I used to head up the customs facilitation for the UK.
Right, okay. And while you were doing that, you obviously got involved in Hunslet in an official capacity. But when did that happen? When did you transfer from being just a fan to being an official, becoming involved?
Well, if I could take you back a little bit to 99, when everybody will sit there thinking, "Oh God, he's going to talk about."
No, I can understand that.
But 99, when we got promoted to Super League, we won the grand final, won the right to go to Super League, and we refused entry. And after that, the late great Graham Lyles, his love for the game was gone. You could tell that. And he did try to build a side the following season, which unfortunately didn't work. And we went from average crowds of about 2,000 to around about 500 by the end of that season.
Yeah.
So Graham was falling out of love with the game. He started looking at options. We had Steve Ball coming as chairman for a few years. We had a guy called Tony Stead coming as chairman for 6 months, and he was just looking to potentially move the club on. Now, at that stage, the RFL had a sort of tacit agreement with an umbrella supporters group called Supporters Direct, that if you had a trust, then they would first of all offer that opportunity for the trust to run the club if the current owner couldn't find an investor.
Yeah.
And that's why we set up the Supporters Trust, because we thought in the unlikely event that Graham couldn't find an owner, we might be given a chance. So after setting up the trust in about 2010, halfway through 2011, I just get a note coming down from when I was sat in the bar, and he said, "Graham wants to see you, wants to see you now." So I went up to see the great man, and he just said, "Can you run the club? Can you run?" It was just, it was
that's a fairly simple question.
Can you run the club? And I just said, "Wow." I said, "You." It's a big question, and to be fair, Graham had asked me to join the board a couple of times before, so I'd been on his radar, and I just said, "We will have to do some due diligence. We'll have to look at what the position is financially. We'll have to look at how you have to do all the governance and all the rules and regulations and everything."
Because you were a busy guy at the time with your full-time job.
Full-time HMRC, So we did some of that due diligence work, and a lot of the problem was going to be that there were a number of directors' loans in there that we really couldn't have afforded to pay. As a sign of the greatness of Graham, he just said, "I'll write those off. I'll write those off if you can run the club."
Really?
And we were still a bit wary of it. So he said, "Look, I'll stay on the board. You take over as chairman. I'll stay on the board for the first 12 months. and let's see how it goes, and let's see if you can run the club. And if you're comfortable and we're comfortable, then we'll see about what we do with the shares. And I remember we started that relationship probably in the February 2012 when I took over as chairman, and about August of that year we had a big debate around the board table about the following year's playing budget. And it was a really, really heated debate. And Graham was clearly not happy about what I was saying. And I was saying, look, we've got to be a little more prudent about this. We can't go out and splash the cash. We can't
speculate. We've got to
be careful with it and stuff like that. And he really, really pushed me and tested me and everything like that. And afterwards, he said, "Can I see you?" And I thought, this is going to be it. This is going to be off you go. I'm going to run the club.
Yeah.
And he just said, "I'm going to sign the club over to you." He said, because you've been tested,
you're
happy, you can stand your ground, you know what you want to do, and you're going to have to make those tough decisions from time to time.
And you've got common sense, I imagine he said as well, actually, because you're right. The first thing about running a club is making sure it's liquid, basically, that it doesn't run into money difficulties.
It does. So he signed the shares over to us in October of that year, to October 2012, and we became supporter-owned.
Do you feel like in that debate they were his true thoughts, or do you think he was just merely trying to test you to see?
Looking back, I think there was a bit of testing in there, but I do think he always felt that rugby league's a sport where you've got to entertain the crowds. So if you can afford that little bit of money to put that little bit of extra skill and quality on the pitch, then you should do so. And we do reflect that. We still go within our means, but actually it is a little bit like Moneyball. We'll look at what we can get, what value we can get,
of course,
and age of people and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Neil, what do you think would have happened? I know it's a completely hypothetical question, but what would have happened if Hunslet had gone into Super League, in 1999? You're the only club that's been denied entry, actually, aren't you, in the whole history of Super League over almost 30 years. What would have happened to the club if they'd got that okay?
I think you've got to look at Wakefield and what happened with Wakefield. Wakefield went up the year before and stayed there for a good number of years. It was on the last year that they were relegated. Graham had negotiated a £2 million 2-year deal with an IT company. We'd got a number of Australians.
I do really? God, I didn't know that.
Come across, yeah. And I don't see why we wouldn't have been as competitive as anybody else in there.
And you'd have had those Leeds derbies coming back, which would have been fantastic, wouldn't it?
It would.
You'd have sold out the ground certainly for those games.
It would,
and for a few more.
Yeah, and you got to look at he'd already arranged and done all the designs and agreement for a stand to be built opposite the current main stand. So that would have been for 6,500 people. We had 2,500 in the main stand, so that would have been 9,000. And the RFL said no because it wasn't 10,000.
Isn't that just incredible? And did you actually? Were you involved in that sort of discussion? I assume there was no right of appeal against that decision.
No, that was all before my time. But Graham sat me down and taught me through that a lot of the time. What you may not know is that Leicester Tigers actually came in and tried to buy their franchise.
Did they?
So they wanted to have a dual code team, and they wanted to go into Super League at the time.
And they would have moved you down to Leicester?
The RFL. The agreement was, that was a first thought, could they move the franchise down to Leicester, but Graham wouldn't sell that, he would never have done that. But actually, the deal was going to be Leicester Tigers pay to come into the Super League, they also paid us 50k, and we would have dropped down to the third tier again. And Graham was not having that.
No, right.
Interesting.
Right. Gosh, that's fascinating, isn't it? I'm not sure that's ever come out before.
I'm not sure it has, and I'm not sure Graham ever wanted to come out, but as the great man's gone now, I think that somebody's got to keep these stories going. So I have no reason to suggest that what he told me is not the truth.
No, of course. Well, no, he's a very honest man, so he certainly wouldn't lie about something as important as that. Gosh, that's amazing, isn't it? And it just sounds like an incredible opportunity missed, though, the whole thing, doesn't it, of Hunslet being denied entry to Super League, and who knows where the club might have been today if that hadn't happened.
Well, this is, and I'm sure I'll get onto this point later, but this is where I'm getting with IMG. You look at it last year, and the RFL got out of jail. They got out of jail because Hull could have finished bottom,
Yes,
and they didn't.
yeah.
And Toulouse could have won us a playoff game, and they didn't.
Yeah.
The impact of teams not getting success when they've achieved it happened to us.
Yeah.
We went from 2,000 to 500, and I think that there's a good chance you'll see that happen again sometime down the line if we have a championship club win the opportunity to go through into Super League and are allowed to do that.
Well, next year is the big test, because next year Wakefield won't be in the Championship, so, and London won't be, the big team coming down from Super League. So the Championship competition, and you're going to be in it, looks a hell of a lot more even next year than it was this year. There's absolutely no guarantee. Obviously, Bradford are tooling up very hard to try and put themselves in a position to win that competition. But winning isn't enough, as you say. It's winning the gradings competition that counts now, assuming that grading remains, the way of allocating clubs to different competitions. If Bradford won it and didn't get promoted, I think all hell will let loose. And the same is true of most other championship clubs as well.
I think they will, and I think you'll probably find that the RFL have got some firmer solicitors or lawyers on the retainer just to handle that situation, which is not what we want for the sport.
No, but what the other countervailing force, Neil, is that the Super League clubs all claim to want 14 teams in Super League from 2026. So I think what might happen next year, I mean, I think the grading system doesn't have a long life, personally. I think, as you say, the RFL struck lucky this time, but they won't do next year. And I think it'll be, I thought it was a disgrace the way that London knew before the start of the season that they'd be relegated anyway. And next year, I just don't think it'll work. I just think it's just storing up trouble.
Well, it'll be around for a while yet, but I don't think it'll be around forever. The RFL got formed for this, haven't they? They had the Framing the Future documentary, they had licensing, they had the Super 8s, they had Super League going off to do their own thing and get their own commercial deal, which didn't happen, and now they're back with the RFL. So all these things go in cycles where we sort of seem to rush. I see the RFL sometimes like kids at Christmas. And it's like, oh, what's that present? And let's have a look at it and play with it for 10 minutes. And then suddenly else, what's that present? And sometimes you just got to sit and think, actually, what's right for the sport? If you saw the way that, we talked earlier about our fans' reaction to that promotion.
Oh, yes.
And everything that went on there. Did you see any of that excitement anywhere when the IMG gradings were announced?
No,
were the people dancing around stadiums? Were the people dancing around boardrooms, jumping up and down?
Well, I put a slightly cynical comment in my column in League Express that, the top club in Super League was St Helens in the grading this year. It was Leeds last year, but this year Saints have moved into the number one position. And I said, when are they having their bus stop parade around St Helens to celebrate being number one in the gradings, of course? And, obviously they're not doing. But it does become extraordinarily bureaucratic. I mean, how much time did you have to spend on putting together all the information required by the RFL in order to satisfy this gradings?
Well, we're quite a
bureaucracy.
A well-governed club. You can expect someone of my background, HMRC. We do things to the nth degree. So we do have, you got monthly finance reports. You got a performance against your forecast, where you're going to finish. We know how much money we've got in the bank, all that kind of stuff. Same with the social media stats. We've got an absolutely fantastic social media team, and if you've seen the stuff that they've been putting out these last few weeks, it's been absolutely outstanding. They're the best guys out there, I think.
Yes,
and they're all volunteers. They're just fantastic.
Who are they all, by the way?
So that's Gareth Evans that does that. That's Craig Irving that does the photography, and Phil Hodgson that does some of the reports. And Ian Pickles that does a lot of it.
It's not the Phil Hodgson who works for League Express, is it?
No.
There are two Phil Hodgsons,
there are
actually.
Two Phil Hodgsons. There's a chant there, Martin, if you want to start it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but it's quite interesting because the two best clubs in League One this year, or not this year actually, but the two clubs that I get loads of stuff from are your club. I seem to get emails from your club twice a day, probably, and it's great that we do. And Ghoul Vikings are the other one, who are very good. And they're tooling up for quite a good social media presence, and I'm delighted to see that. And I think they'll be very welcome. Into the competition next year.
But you bring an interesting point, because if you look at how much time and effort it does take us, what I say to the RFL, what I said to Tony Sutton was, a bit like the old Monty Python sketch. What has IMG ever done for us?
Yes.
What have they done for us? So if you're talking about they wanted to rebrand the sport, all we've done is just tighten the Super League logo.
Yeah.
And the League One and Betfred logos, and made new ones for the women's and wheelchair, and given them all different colours. I don't see that as anything fantastic. Then they were going to reimagine the game, and that's gone from reimagine the game means going from 12:49 to 12:12:12. Well, that's not, to me, reimagining a sport. It's just reordering it, to be honest.
Of course it is. Yeah, yeah, and the thing that. The thing about the whole IMG role in rugby league is it's actually, after the first 2 years, as I understand it, I mean, not a lot of information came out, and still hasn't come out, about the nature of the contract between IMG and the RFL. So we're all a bit in the dark about it, to be honest, Neil. But as I understand it, after the first 2 years, the RFL is now paying $450,000 a year for IMG services, and they had to make probably 10 or 11 people redundant earlier this year in order to pay for that. That seems an extraordinarily bad deal. I mean, you've mentioned, a lot of people have said to me that IMG have come in and given a lot of digital expertise to the rugby league clubs, and I've got to take that as a matter of faith, because I don't know that. I've not had dealings with them. They don't talk to me, it seems. But You've mentioned your club having a great social media group of people who push the club forward. Is any of that down to IMG?
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
So we go to IMG and talk about digital. We've asked for any assistance early days when it was in there, probably the first, second year, but no one's ever been out to us. It's all about promoting the big brand, which is Super League. And I get that. If that's going to be what you promote, what your focus is on the first couple of years, great, but you ought to be feeding that down and bringing that further down to us. You've got to look at what the cost is. You're right there. So the cost is arguably, it's been widely reported at about $450,000. But what else is the cost? You've got Alison O'Brien there, one of the directors. You've got her team, who are almost full-time on IMG stuff. You've got the rest of the directors at the RFL board, who spend a lot of their time actually talking about IMG stuff to everyone else. You've got the time that you mentioned earlier about myself and others having to put in to do this cost. So if you're going to bring in and say there have been benefits, tell me what those benefits are, and then tell me what the cost is. But also, if you're going to talk about the benefits, how do we know that some of those benefits would not have happened in any case?
Of course.
Whether IMG were there or not. You can't just pin it on there and say, oh, that ground's been improved. We know for a fact that Wakefield have been trying to improve their ground and get a better ground for the last 10, 15 years. Yes. It hasn't just come up because IMG said, oh, you need a better ground.
The only example I can think of where a club has actually done something to its ground that it might not have done if IMG hadn't been there is probably Castleford, putting those seats, in the in that side of the ground facing the main stand, which I don't think they would have done if it hadn't been for IMG, because they've got additional grading points that protects their position in Super League. But I'm not sure even that's. I'm not sure the fans of Castleford actually wanted that to happen.
Well, I think, again, you've got to... If I go out in the street and I talk to a rugby league fan and I ask, what about promotion, relegation? Do you understand how that works? Yes, they'll tell you that. If I go out and say, can you explain to me the IMG grading criteria? The very few of them will be able to explain anything about it.
Yes.
So that takes it away. And no one's against improving standards. Absolutely not. And if you set IMG aside and said, right, that's now a process that you're going to use to be measured on about how you improve facilities and standards and offers for your fans and everything like that, but you keep promotion and relegation completely separate, I think everybody would buy into that.
Well, my thought, Neil, and I don't know whether you'd agree with me on this, was that the whole idea of assessing clubs in terms of all these criteria that are included within the IMG gradings, plus one or two more, things like academy and, the way clubs relate to junior clubs in the district and so on. I'd put that into it. But when you actually create a grading score, I think that should then determine your distribution, the amount that it shouldn't have anything to do with league position or whether you can be promoted or relegated. It should determine how much money you get from the central.
So that's been
source.
brought in. That's been brought in this year. So for Championship and League One, that's been brought in.
Right.
So you actually get funded on the basis of your grading points, not
right.
where you finish in the league. Doesn't have Super League because that's Super League they're operated separately.
Sure.
And this is where the sport has a problem. You can't have a situation where one league gives everybody exactly the same amount,
no.
and then everybody else is measured on a different parameter.
Right, right. Well, that was introduced quite silently, wasn't it? Because I wasn't aware of that.
Well, it's only been introduced for the following year coming, so I presume that the RFL will be announcing that shortly. But that's the way that we've had the central funding distributed this year.
Right, and what's your view about that?
Well, I don't mind that. I again, that's what I'm saying. If you're going to link the money to what you're getting from the IMG facilities that you're providing, that's fine. But keep the playing side separate.
Sure.
Don't stop people going up and down.
No. That's right. Another thing that I think I seem to recall you talking about a few weeks ago. I got the feeling that you're one of those people who are probably share my view that the Championship and League One probably shouldn't be two separate competitions. I think that Championship and League One should be merged and should be, you shouldn't have to battle for promotion and then be subject to relegation from the Championship. I think there's tremendous scope for there are 24 clubs now in this coming year in the Championship and League One. I think you could very easily construct a system where they were all in one league.
Yes, you can, and I made some rather sweeping proposals to the RFL last year on conferencing, and we watered that down to try and present it to the League One clubs as an option, but they didn't go for it. And I think that some of those Championship clubs will be sort of regretting that position now. But I do think that you've either got to have two things. You've got to have utopia, which is promotion and relegation all through everywhere, and we've not got that. So if not got that, and you're going to protect the top clubs, fine, just do it. Don't dance around the houses with it, just do it. And say you're going to protect those top 12, 14 clubs. They're going to be a Super League for the next 5, 10 years, whatever they are. And everybody else can have a meaningful competition underneath. The problem you've got with League One is back to when Ralph was the big expansionist, the big let's go out and push this sport and get it more nationally and all that kind of stuff. And I get what he was trying to do. I understand what he was trying to do. But the problem is that if you do that in the way that we did it, you don't support the teams that come in. So we lost Oxford, we lost Gloucester, we lost West Wales, we lost London, all that kind of stuff. And they don't bring any fans. They don't bring anyone. So if people look at our average crowd and say, well, Hunslet only averaged 500 last year. If you take the non-Heartland clubs, we were averaging 750, 800 over the last 2 or 3 years. And if you go into Championship, it goes even higher because you get more people not just coming to you from opposition clubs, but more people coming back because they're going to see clubs that they expect to be more of a threat to you and to give you more of a game.
What do you think your average crowd will be then next year when you're in the Championship?
Well, I'd be disappointed if it's less than 1,000, but
I'm sure it will be because there are lots of other Yorkshire teams nearby who are going to be bringing quite a lot of fans, I would have thought. Yeah,
well, the benefit for us, of course, is we haven't been in there. Well, it's a downside for the club because we haven't been in there for 10 years. But the benefit is, having not been there for 10 years, I think there'll be a lot of away fans thinking, well, actually, I won't mind a trip to South Leeds.
Yeah, let's go and see it.
Let's go and see it. Let's go and see what it's all about.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What I mean, obviously, you've had a role for many years in an organisation, HMRC, that's very tightly run and has to be, and is. I mean, I don't know how it works, but I can only imagine it. Everybody knows what their role is in that organisation and so on. But when it comes to rugby league, and in particular when it comes to the RFL, how do you think it works? I mean, I get the feeling at the moment we're spending and I've said this before on this podcast, 450,000 a year on IMG, plus another approximately 300,000 a year on the non-executive directors of both the RFL and RL Commercial. That's 750,000 a year, which, some people say is not a lot of money, but it actually is when you've not got much, and is that the best way to spend that sort of money, do you think? Because I get the feeling that the non-executive directors, the vast majority of them are not rugby league people and probably wouldn't be seen at your stadium, once in a blue moon, I would have thought.
We rarely get anyone from the RFL. We do get. We've had Ralph there, we've had Tony Sutton there, we've had Rob Hicks there down from time to time, but we don't get anyone regularly. I don't recall that there's ever any the non-execs there. The money side is very different. You look way back to '96 when they got the first Sky deal. Nigel Wood did a fantastic job getting that deal. It was a big deal. But he stood on those steps at Red Hall and said, this money will not go into the pockets, just go straight into the pockets of players. Unfortunately, we couldn't have controlled that, and it did go straight in the pockets of
course,
players.
Yeah.
And if you look at it now, we should really be having a situation where why would any Super League club be getting more than, say, $500,000? And why would any champ club be getting any more than $100,000? And why would any League One club be getting any more than $50,000? And then you'd have a lot more money separate to do the things that you want to do. So instead of having club academies, I'd set up academies north, south, east, and west, and central, and have almost like a system, a draft system that you use to bring people through. But you'd also be able to pay for the professionalisation of the officials. You'd be able to pay for the women's sport. You'd be able to pay for the PDRL and all that, and the wheelchair stuff. You'd be able to use the money in a different way. So I think when the RFL come in with IMG and sort of say, look, your facilities, you've got to improve this, that, or the other, my question back is, well, why didn't you control that in the first place? When you were giving those funds out, why did you not say, there's your central funding, but a minimum of 25%, 30%, 40% of that must be spent on grassroots or community or improving your facilities and things like that. There's a different way of doing things.
I mean, it is quite amazing, isn't it? Back in 1996, 5-year deal with Rupert Murdoch, £87 million, and all went to the clubs, all went to the players. You'd have thought, hold at least half of that back to create a proper structure for the game that supports the club, supports, the development of crowds and so on and so forth, the development of participation and so on. But no, it was all poured into people's pockets, and it was just a shambles, really.
It was, and we were as guilty as anybody. I mean, I wasn't involved in the time, but we did what every other club did, and you went to reward the players. And
of course,
should the players be worth more? Of course they should. Should some of them employ as much as footballers or even more? Of course they should.
Yes.
But you can't pay them more than the market.
You can't pay them what you've not got, can you?
That's the issue.
No, I couldn't agree more.
I was going to say that that sort of academy system you proposed before, do you think that's something that the owners would go for? I know they seem to have a lot of power, the Super League owners, in terms of some of the proposals that are brought in. Do you think that's something they'd go for if it meant that they didn't have to invest on it?
I think if you got the central investment from elsewhere, they'd be more keen to do it. Where you'll get the pushback, I think, is where they've had the successful academies, which they've had them for a while now. So the clubs that have got them, like your Leeds and your Hull and Hull KR and Saints and Wigan and that, they'll go well. But you will get a pushback at some stage where some clubs are coming in and saying, right, we want to run an academy, and the RFL are refusing them a licence. Well, you wouldn't need a licence if it was done centrally.
I'd love to see something like that, like a draft system brought in.
So would I.
I feel like we're better positioned to do that over here than what, say, the NRL could do, because there's already so much money going into junior development with every individual club. We've seen some of the talent that's been unearthed by clubs like Penrith and the Broncos, but I feel like for England, where some clubs don't have licences for their elite pathway clubs, it'd be awesome to see something like a draft. It just provides so much excitement, doesn't it?
And I think it's not just about Super League then. It's about, if they're coming through that system and they're 18, 19, 20, then they're drafted in at League One, at Championship level. And then, as they get older, then they're drafted further up.
I mean,
some of that money that you pay for that draft pick, is to pay for that draft pick, some of it would go to the individual, obviously, but some of it goes back into the academy to make
Sure.
sure that continues to develop.
Yeah, well, I hope one day that will be introduced, although I think it's probably some years down the track yet. But what do you think? Obviously, as somebody who's steeped in rugby league and who's got a role with the club that you have, the constant news about clubs being in financial trouble, it's frustrating, isn't it? I find. I mean, I would love nothing more than to. I mean, we publish news, obviously. I'd love nothing more than every news item to be a positive one about how clubs are doing great, clubs are enhancing their support, clubs are, succeeding in various ways. And yet so often the news is that clubs are, on the verge of going under because they've run out of money. Must be very frustrating.
It is very frustrating, and I have said before, and I think Rob Graham does a great job up at the RFL with limited staff and limited resource, to be honest. But I do think we used to have things in the HMRC called quarterly business reviews. So basically, you would have to go through and show how your area of the business was performing, what you were delivering in terms of value for money, and I think you've got to have some control like that. So. Do they ever go and look at the boardrooms? Do they ever go and visit the boardrooms? Do they sit in there to see what they want to do? If you come to us, as I said earlier, we'd have a financial report in there. That financial report will show you our original forecast of the year. It'll cost you forecast outturn as it currently is, and then the projected forecast outturn, and what actions we may need to take if we don't do that. Now, I think that we've got that expertise in there because we've got a couple of management accounts, we've got a financial account in there, we've got me as ex-HMRC. And that's not being big-headed. It's about if you've got the people...
You've got the right expertise in place.
And expertise in place.
Yeah.
It's sometimes easier to manage, and some clubs don't have that. And that's not a criticism of them. It's what can we do to support that.
Yeah.
So if Rob had the staff and he could have a system where he could go around and do that quarterly business review and just say, look, guys, you're not going to be able to do that. Or you need to think about doing this a little bit differently, then it might make them think differently. You've got to get to a situation at our sport, and in particular our level, probably even Super League, but where your playing budget has to be your balancing figure.
Yes.
If your playing budget is not your balancing figure, is more than your balancing figure, then I think that's a difficulty. I saw, was it Eamon McManus went on at Saints and saying that he was going to spend up to the salary cap this year because he thought doing anything else was a false economy. Now, perhaps he can afford to fund that, and perhaps he can afford, if there's a drop in what he's paying in the salary cap and what's actually coming in, he can meet that gap. But if everybody went to that model, we'd go boom and bust straight away.
We would, yes. Yes. And what's interesting is that the amount of money that's coming centrally to the clubs has not quite halved over in recent years, but it's getting on for that way, isn't it? And yet the costs are constant.
Some of it has quartered.
Yeah.
Has quartered. You know, so we were weaned off it, if you like. And if somebody said to us tomorrow, look, we're taking your central distribution off you, you're not getting anything anymore, would we fold? No, we wouldn't. What we would have to do is trim down our playing budget to make sure that we could afford that. But I think what we've got to do is start to wean that down so you can use that money for better resources.
I mean,
elsewhere.
one of the things I've said, Neil, and I'd welcome your view on this. And you're obviously not a Super League CEO, but when you look at the salary cap, I mean, the Super League clubs were faced at their meeting last week with these salary cap proposals, which looked absolutely ridiculous to me. I don't know how anybody could come up with them, piling additional costs on when there's no additional money, doing it precisely the opposite of what you've just said. And it just seems to me that the game's almost out of control in a way, in financially. And when you talk about IMG gradings for finance, to me, any club that has to have a wealthy investor topping up its income by, say, £1 million or more a year, then under the finance criteria, it should get zero. Actually, in my view,
I don't disagree. And if I've always argued with Rob and with Tony Sutton beforehand that if you look at directors' loans, If you look at directors' loans, and removing all those directors' loans would collapse that club,
Yes.
then actually that is not a financially secure club. That's your problem.
No. It's a nuclear bomb waiting to go off, isn't it? Really, in those terms. But it's absolutely crazy. Anyway, let's just move on to one or two other things. In the city of Leeds, you've got at one time, Leeds and Hunslet were great rivals going back many, many years. And you played that famous game, didn't you, at Elland Road, the championship final. Was it 1938, I think? And, that was, by all accounts, an absolutely great event. But in the days since then, Leeds have gone one way and Hunslet have gone the other. Do you think there could ever come a day again when Hunslet and Leeds was a viable derby match again, Neil?
I'd love to be able to say to Gary Edrington, move over because she's standing in my light.
Yeah.
And we can perhaps get to that situation down the line, but we can't do it unless you level up. Now, you've got people like Matt Dwyer and IMG coming in saying that what they really want is jeopardy in every game. And if they want jeopardy in every game, that means you walk into the stadium and you don't know who's going to win.
Precisely, yes.
Play on the way. The only way you can do that is to level up the sport. And if you level up the sport, that's about finance. So if you're talking about a Super League club getting £1 million central funding and Cornwall getting 30,000, who actually needs the £1 million funding? It's Cornwall.
Yes,
it's not the Super League club.
Yeah.
So unless we can get to something like that, then there's a problem. The other problem, of course, is if you're going to be on grading, you look at our stadium compared to Headingley. And fair play to Gary and his team and Paul Caddick and everybody there. They've done a fantastic job sorting out Headingley Stadium. Can't argue with that. But yet, when we took a £23 million proposal from an investor down south to purchase the vast majority of South Leeds Stadium and upgrade the pitches and everything, the council turned us down blank. And yet, they're now facing a £45 million loss.
When was that then?
So that was about 3 years ago.
Right.
3 years ago.
Right.
So what you see on one hand is that the council work hand in hand with Leeds and with Yorkshire Cricket to improve that and say, this is it, this is a jewel in our crown. They'll look down at South Leeds Stadium and say, well, we'll just leave that to one side.
Do you think there ever will be any improvements made at South Leeds Stadium? A major stand on the other side of the pitch, for example?
Well, we're working on it, and we've been working on it for a long time. But every time we bring a proposal, there's always some barrier to it. What we're trying to do, when we brought the original proposal, it was going to be like Sporting Club Hunslet. So we're going to have a football team there, a rugby union team there, and this is what sort of collapsed the deal in the end. But we have now got that. We've got South Leeds FC playing in the Northern Counties League. We've got Hunslet Wolves playing on the rugby union side.
Have they started yet?
Yeah, they have started, yeah.
Right.
And they're doing they're Division 9 or 10 in the Yorkshire Merit League or something like that. So it's really, really low down. And they lost the first game by 60 points when they only had 12 points. They've won every single game since then. And you've got Dave Ellis there from...
I know Dave from old. Yeah, where do they recruit their players from?
So they're recruiting their players at the minute. They've got some of our players that we've previously let go. They're getting rugby league players from Alton and East Leeds.
So it's mainly rugby league lads who are playing?
So it's rugby league lads are playing. And this is what Dave says. They can't cope with the Wolves... way of playing, because what the Wolves are doing is stopping the ball going off the pitch because they can't cope with the line-outs and just playing rugby league every time they get the ball.
Be a much more exciting game for us to watch if that was the case.
Yeah, absolutely exciting game to watch. So we're trying to do it in a different way. So what we're trying to do now is there's a French investor involved in that. So we get making links with him, and we were talking to him about potentially doing something with the pitch and with the training pitch and we're in discussion with the council about taking over some of the bars and some of the running of the stadium further down the line when they've got some investment agreed with the Football Foundation to do the pitches, the 5-a-side pitch if you've been out of South Leeds Stadium, and the 11-a-side pitch and all that.
Well, I must come down to another game at some time soon. The only problem for me is that you always play on Sundays. So if you played on a Saturday or a Friday, I'd be there for a game.
Well, we will probably have to switch a couple of our games to Friday for next season. So,
right. Just
watch this space.
I certainly will. Yeah.
Just in terms of the playing group, mate, I guess a two-part question. Going back 12, 18 months ago, do you expect to be promoted into the championship for season 2025? And then also, what's the forecast looking like for the 2025 season?
So, if you go back to the season before last, and we finished second in the league, and we were on an 11-match winning streak, and we went to work into the last game of the season and lost. And then we had injuries at the wrong time and everything, and we had probably, I think if we'd have played those playoff games 5 weeks earlier, we'd have been okay. We'd have probably won that promotion. So it was a bit of a downside to see Alan Kilshaw go. Alan left. He obviously got a young family. He wanted to stay that side of the Pennines. Sure. He was having to do all that travelling. So he went without disappointment, but blessing, if you like. So we brought in a new coach, Dean Muir, rookie coach. He interviewed really well, and there were some high quality candidates in there that we interviewed as well. And we just thought we'd give somebody else a different go. He came in. We'd done most of the recruitment because it sort of happened between Alan Kilshaw going and him going, and you sort of got to get on the front foot. So he was a bit, this is not really my squad, but he did manage it throughout that season, and he did start to bring in what he saw was loan players or took players that hadn't been given a chance, like Jude Ferreira and things like that. And when we went into the league season, we were confident we'd make the playoffs. We always thought we were going to be top four side, but we didn't start off very well, and a few of the fans were a bit verbal about that, and talking that they thought we should have been doing better.
Did any of them demand that Dean be sacked?
Yes, yeah. There was one guy who's now really good friends with Dean Muir, and I won't mention his name, but he kept putting on posts, why amateur Muir? Why do we have to have amateur Muir? But he's the best friends now, and he said, I see why you've done it. But Dean was always of the opinion that, look, getting to the top four, I'm not bothered, but getting to the top four, that's when you hit form. You don't do it before then, because otherwise you've burnt yourselves out.
Yes, it's timing, isn't it?
And he was right, and it is timing. Yeah. And as we went through, I do remember the last game of the season, the league game of the season, we were away at Midlands Hurricanes and we won. And any one of those 4 games against Midlands Hurricanes could have gone either way that last season. They were really tight games.
Yeah.
And we won. And the following day, Rochdale were playing Keighley. And I was really hoping that Rochdale would win and push us from 3rd to 4th, because our away form had been so much better than our home form. So when we went to Rochdale and lost, and we talked about that earlier, and we got that second bite of the cherry, I was fairly confident that the hardest game we were going to have then was going to be Midlands at home, and it was. We only won in the last.
You did, yes,
2 minutes.
yes, amazing.
Great try from Jack Render. But then we went to Rochdale, we were confident. We went to Keighley, we were confident. When it was Swinton, I have to say, I honestly thought it would be a game too far, and that's because they peaked. They had the excitement of winning a trophy, the celebrations on the pitch, the celebrations in the Boatmakers Arms, which is Dean's pub in Keighley that we all went to straight afterwards. Were fantastic. So I just thought, is it going to do it? And then we did. And then a couple of players had already agreed to go to other clubs, and that was a bit of a downer. I think they regretted that a little bit. I think they would have stayed if they'd really thought it through and had an option to do that, but they didn't. So it was almost straight into that recruitment drive for next year. And that was hard for Dean, because he'd already started looking at a team expecting probably to be in League One.
Yeah.
So he'd started building the base of that spine up, and then thinking... And then, some of those players actually said, do you know what, I really don't want to go around in League One. Some of the players asked to be released to go to other clubs. Right. So he was happy enough to do that. But then he cancelled his own holiday, and he went on that recruitment drive, and he's done an absolutely superb job, I think, with the funding that we've got, and we've probably got the lowest budget in the league, and I wouldn't argue with that. But I think we're going to give people a game. I think we'll be competitive.
It's interesting, though, how difficult it is to plan, isn't it? When you get promoted or relegated, you've got to completely revise all the plans that you might have had in place, and that takes some doing.
It does take some doing. So, it's only, is it 9 weeks since we won
Yeah.
promotion, and then between that we'd have
In 9 weeks, it seems like yesterday to me.
financial forecast. You've done all the squad budget. We've had deep dive into hospitality and what we're going to be doing there. Deep dive into match day operations. We've announced the ticketing prices, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the season tickets, and you've done the kit and the merchandise. We've done a deal to do online merchandise with a company now. Our partner company Tufts are going to do that for us. And there's a whole host of tasks that have been done.
Yeah,
it's just been non-stop.
Amazing. No off-season for the CEO, mate.
Yeah,
absolutely not, mate.
Just a quick one on League One. It's interesting, isn't it, that you look at League One and of all the 3 professional competitions in this country, that's the one with the national footprint. In fact, because you've got teams in Cornwall, you've got Midlands Hurricanes in Birmingham, you've got Newcastle up in the northeast and so on, and Workington, of course, up in Cumbria. It's actually a damned expensive competition to play in terms of travel costs.
It is, and you're.
Going down to Cornwall, how did you manage that?
Yeah, well, you used to get travel grants before. You used to get so much a season, but now you only get a travel grant to go to Cornwall, but it doesn't cover the full costs.
No.
So you when we used to go to West Wales, we just used to about manage to get the players there and back in the same day, and we did that because, without being disrespectful, we thought we could win that game. With Cornwall, you got to be a little bit more careful because it's further to go, and you have to stop away. There's no two ways about it. So it's then you're paying for the coaches, you're paying for the stop off, for training stop off, you're paying for meals for players down there, you're paying for an overnight accommodation, and then all the way back up. So it's not cheap at all.
And what's it like when you get there? What's your impression of Cornwall as a rugby league club?
It's different. I do see some of the crowds that they publish, and I do look at when I've been there, and I don't think that always quite reflects the number of people that were there. And it's different people every time. So a lot of them are holidaymakers or people that are down that way, the rugby league fans and have come to that. It's very welcoming, and the people I've seen there, quite a lot of them are the Union fans because it's the Union ground, and it's a lovely little ground. It's nice, but it's on a massive hill that you walk up from the train station, which really takes its toll on some of the fans, I have to say.
Yes.
But just down the road, there's at least 2 breweries down there. So
yes.
Very conveniently located.
I think,
Do you think, clubs like... Cornwall apparently is in the throes of being sold to new owners. I don't know how much I'm not sure much has come out about it yet, but I think Eric Perez, the original Canadian guy, is moving on, or at least selling all or part of his interest to local people down there. But do you think Cornwall and clubs like the Midlands Hurricanes and Newcastle Thunder have got a long-term future in rugby league?
I think it's difficult, but I think that's where conferencing would work. So if you looked at, if you had a Southern Conference, which had had your clubs like your Oxfords and your Hemels, and maybe a Bristol in there, and maybe a Cornwall and things like that, and you let them grow in a way that was better for them, so they're not getting battered every week, but it is competitive, and then say, do you know what? The cherry on the cake is, whoever wins your conference can be in the playoffs. And start to do it like that, rather than just say, right, you're a team, here you go into the professional league.
Absolutely.
I always remember when Hemel joined, and I was sat next to the Hemel chairman, and he just looked, and he looked shocked. He looked white in the face. I said, what's wrong with you? He said, we were told by Ralph that we were going to be in a development league. He says, I'm looking here, we're playing Rochdale, Doncaster, Keighley, Hunslet. He said, I don't see that as a development league.
No, that's right. So, given a false promise in a sense. Yeah.
Would you like to see more championship games being broadcast?
Oh, absolutely. I know there was a potential deal for free broadcast last year, and it was turned down. And I don't think you can turn that kind of thing down, personally. I think you again, it's about.
But there was
the market.
no money coming in, was there? That was the trouble.
But it's about the market, isn't it, Martin? If you can't drive the money, you need to drive the product, don't you? So if you create something that people want to watch, then that drives the what you can actually pay for and what you can charge for. If we're not on TV, nobody's going to watch it anyway.
Yeah, I think the deal was with Premier Sports that they would cover every game in the same way that Sky covers every game in Super League, and I think the deal was for £50,000 per year, shared between 14 clubs. So obviously zero, effectively, and quite a few of them just didn't want to go with it.
Yeah, and I get that, and I do understand that. But if we don't get that, what have we got in its place? What is there in its place? We've got Sportsman, which does a fantastic job when they come and do it. We haven't really seen much of the Rugby League doing their own stream this year. So if
have you got any insight into whether there is going to be any sort of broadcasting deal for the Championship next year?
Not as far as I know.
No. I mean that's just ridiculous, isn't it? Really.
It is, but I suppose the other question, if you from the RFL and RL commercial point of view, is who's paying for it? Who's coming in for a deal? And the content's there at the minute. You're looking at, apart from football, I think every other sport has taken a cut in broadcast income from those major sports dealers, whether that be TNT, BT, Sky Sports. But
one of the things about a lot of other sports is that they're able to charge very high prices to go and watch them. And I actually saw evidence of this yesterday with my wife, who's a very keen tennis fan, and she goes down. She often tries to get tickets for Wimbledon, but struggles. They're very hard to get. But she also goes down to the Queen's competition in the couple of weeks before Wimbledon to watch tennis down there as well. And yesterday they opened the sales for Queen's, and it opened at 10 o'clock yesterday morning. You had to get onto their website, and you had to. And if you weren't there by 10:15, there was no way you're going to get a ticket. And she ended up, 2 tickets for two separate days, paying £145 and £175, which is just money that you couldn't imagine anybody paying for any rugby league event. And those people, they know they're going to sell out. They know that people are going to pay those prices. To watch a sport that, in my view, doesn't compare with rugby league, really. And I was arguing with my wife about this, but she won't have it. But it's amazing that we still try and sell tickets on the basis of them being dirt cheap.
But the other side of that is, if you look at what happened with the World Cup, and the rugby league priced themselves out of it, didn't they? If they'd have been offering tickets at 15 quid, then we'd have sold those stadiums. But they were trying to sell it as a premium sport, which it is a premium sport, but again, it's about markets. Again, it's about market prices. You can only sell what people are going to be prepared to pay for it.
Yes, you've got to create the market, and which is what, say, the NFL are so clever at doing when it comes to selling their games that they run in this country. In October or thereabouts. They know how to create a market, and we don't really, do we, at the moment?
No. And that's the kind of expertise that you really hope that someone like IMG could bring. They
keep
going on about
yet.
MMA and what they did with MMA.
Yeah.
Well, where are we seeing any of that being brought into how you?
No, they've not brought that.
Sell rugby league?
That's what I thought they were bringing. And that's why a lot of people were excited when they were announced, because we all thought that was what was going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at like the UFC. They've got someone like Dana White at the top, who's a marketing genius. The way he's grown that sport as well. It'd be great if we get someone like that with the RFL.
Gets Trump to a lot of his events, doesn't he? I mean, for goodness sake, what a brilliant
That's it. They
guy.
show the crowds, and there's like hundreds of celebrities showing up to those UFC events. So they do an outstanding job. Any last questions for Neil before
I'm
we
sure that we
wrap it up?
could talk all day probably with Neil. It's been a fascinating conversation, Neil. I hope you've enjoyed it. And is there anything more that you want to just sort of tell us about Hunslet or rugby league or anything
really.
life generally?
I just encourage everybody to come down. I mean, I think the number of people. If I got a pound for every person that I walk out in Hunslet and they say, "I used to go down there," come back to the sport.
You love it. Yeah.
We got some fantastic offers on in terms of early bird offers and of season tickets and that.
And how can fans get a hold of those, mate? Just go to the website?
Just go on the website and just go online. But at the moment, the early bird offer is for concessions at £100 for a season ticket, and for adults £150. And they'll
Great
go
value.
by £50 each on the 1st of January, so you've got until Christmas to get them. But that's great value in terms of watching Championship Rugby League. It will be exciting. We've got 4 bars down there. We've got free car parking. It's all-seater stadium. There'll be food, everything. The entertainment will be there. You come down, we'll provide it, and let's have a good crack at it next year.
Right, you and me then, Jake.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
two invited. You two want to come back and get you on the president's table, don't you?
Yeah, that'd be
sounds
marvellous.
awesome.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
thank you ever so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure to speak to you both.
It
Yeah,
has,
awesome.
and good luck to you next year and to everybody at the club. Hope it really goes as well as we all hope it will.
One last question I will have for you, gents, though, is the Golden Boot Awards coming up. Do we have any early picks that we want to? Any predictions in terms of who might win that award?
Herbie Farnworth, it's got to be, hasn't it?
Yeah, I like Herbie.
Yeah.
You can't go beyond that. You can't.
No.
Go beyond that.
Yeah, perfect. All right, Neil, well, thanks heaps for your time, mate.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil.
And
Thank you.
we will remind our viewers and listeners, we do have League Express on the table here, Martin. Obviously, we've had a lot of guests over the past
Yeah.
few weeks. We haven't really talked too much about the paper itself, but heaps of news going on in the off-season.
Absolutely.
So for the listeners and viewers, head along to www.totalrl.com/shop for your copy. And yeah, we'll wrap it up here and do it again next week, Martin.
Thank you. Thanks, Jake.
Awesome. Thanks,
Cheers.
Neil.
Thank you.
Cheers.